Hi everyone, thank you for joining my session. Today I will talk about how we involved our community in all aspects of building our developer documentation, from the discovery phase to continuously contributing content. First, I'd like to introduce myself, our team, our community, and our documentation site. Then I will talk about our processes. I will tell you a bit about how we started building our documentation, but more about our current editorial workflow and the approach that worked for us. I will also tell you about the tools we use, and by tools I don't mean software applications, but different types of guides we developed to help the review process, to keep our documentation consistent, and to support contribution. In the last part, I will discuss the many ways we use to communicate with our community. All of these communication channels are fully remote. I thought that to put everything in context, I'd start with introducing myself, our team, and community. I'm a technical writer specialized in developer documentation. I started out in the Drupal community, where I had the chance to get involved in the community, and I was fascinated by people from different parts of the world with different technical and language skills contributing together to documentation projects. And it was very interesting to see how the results were enhanced by the different skills and different points of view. I am a co-author of the Drupal 8 user guide. It was an amazing and inspiring experience to see how, thanks to the well-structured editorial workflow and clear guidelines, so many people in different roles, developers, writers, editors, could produce such a consistent end result. As the director of documentation at PlatformOS, I had the opportunity to establish all processes for our documentation from the very beginning, manage all phases of the editorial workflow, create templates, write, edit, and review content, and continuously monitor, measure, and improve our documentation. It's this experience that I would like to share with you in hopes of providing some insights that you will be able to use in your own projects. Now, some information about our team and community. So what is PlatformOS? PlatformOS is a model-based application development platform aimed at front-end developers and site builders. So the main target audience of our documentation is developers, but of course our documentation has to cater to other target audience segments as well. We have been a distributed, fully remote company from the start. We have team members all over the globe, for example in the US, Australia, Romania, Hungary, Poland, and other countries. Similarly, we have community members from all over the world too. Everyone is working remotely all of the time. The distribution in space also comes with the fact that groups of people working together are in different time zones, so we had to consider this when we developed processes and selected tools. This is our documentation site. It provides onboarding, conceptual information, tutorials, examples, API references, use cases, and best practices. Following the Docs as Code approach, it is built for iterations and collaboration. Our documentation is fully open source. You can find all the code and content in our GitHub repository. Last year, we received a great recognition for our work on the documentation side. We won the UK Technical Communication Award and were praised for many aspects of our documentation, including our workflow, how we collaborate with our users, the clarity and structure of our content, and the information architecture of our site. Now, let's dive into our processes. The inspirations for our processes came from the design thinking method, the content-first approach, Docs as Code, best practices from the Drupal community, and my experience of working with team members in different roles. From the very beginning, our goal was to build community-driven documentation. This means that we involve our community in all aspects of our documentation. Engaging our users early on in an agile and iterative process ensured that we can test and validate all of our assumptions and quickly modify anything if needed. We involved our community in everything. We always shared what we did as soon as we had something that we could discuss with them. That means sitemaps, layout plans, plans for content, navigation, and so on. UX research has played a vital role in this from the beginning because we could get more structured results that way that were easier to use. We test everything so we can make sure that we can change course and adjust to user needs quickly. In the beginning, it was sometimes difficult to share something that I haven't felt was done, but I learned that by providing context and explanations, and by constantly communicating your plans and explaining how their feedback will help your decisions, you can prepare users to give feedback on half-done content. As I saw how useful the feedback was, I got more and more comfortable sharing early, sharing outlines, plans, strategy, and discussing those with community members. We found that this constant collaboration builds trust. As our process is completely transparent, our community continuously sees what we are working on and how our docs evolve, and community members can be sure that their opinions are heard and acted upon. Now we still consider every piece of feedback, each question, pull request that fixes a typo, to be contribution, because everything contributes to improving our documentation. If a line in a code example is fixed, or a sentence that is difficult to understand is reformulated, it means that all users who visit the documentation after the fix will see a better version. This is why when I talk about contribution, I talk about all types of feedback through any channel and code and content contribution to our documentation. When we started thinking about our editorial workflow, we decided to come up with a process that could work for all participants, including developers in our team and community, but also writers, editors, or external contributors. And our main target audience is developers, and they are the ones who contribute the most content to our documentation. As they already use some kind of version control system, most often Git, we selected a tool that they are already familiar with, GitHub. And to make the whole workflow easy to adopt for them, we follow a docs as code approach. Our editorial workflow for content is very similar to how code gets reviewed and deployed. All of our code and content is on GitHub, and for transparency and to have the same process for all participants, we do all project management tasks on GitHub's issue tracker as well. This means that community members can open tickets, discuss issues, see what we are planning and what we are working on, including pull requests that are in review. This proved to be very helpful for our community members because the whole life cycle of any task is fully transparent and they can follow the whole process. Everything is collected on GitHub. For example, if we get feedback on the feedback block of one of our documentation topics, we create a ticket on GitHub for that task. So, these are the steps of our editorial workflow. When we get internal or external feedback through Slack, the feedback block, user research, team members, and so on, all of these requests are considered tasks, regardless of where they came from. The process starts with creating a ticket for the task. Once the ticket is ready, it goes into the backlog of our internal sprint planning, where we discuss priorities, and the selected tickets are added for the next sprint. Then the author writes new content or makes changes to existing content. The author can be any of our team members, but also any community member. The process is the same for everyone. When the content is done, the author sends a pull request to the documentation GitHub repository. A developer and writer review the PR, they suggest and discuss changes, and once it's final, we approve and merge it. We work with continuous integration and deployment, so once PR has been merged, the new code or content goes through automated testing and is deployed to our staging, then to our production site. As I mentioned, the whole process from ticket creation to merging the PR is fully transparent, and anyone can see and contribute to it at any step on GitHub. In this section, I would like to tell you about the tools we use, like our style guide or templates. We serve a diverse, highly motivated and active community, so we aim to provide everything they need to contribute to our documentation. To find the most fitting tools and workflow, we had to think about contributor experience first and explore what makes a great contributor experience when contributing to documentation. Also, we had to make sure that all of these tools work in a remote environment. Here are the aspects we considered and how we address them. First, the ease of getting on board. We describe ways for our community members to get involved in our contributor guide. We made the guide as short as possible, with links to relevant content like the style guide or templates. entry points for different types of contributors. We wanted to make it very easy to get involved for all segments of our target audience, so we offer different ways to contribute, both regarding the time contributors need to put in and the skill level they have. For quick feedback, we added a feedback block at the bottom of each documentation page, where the minimum input is clicking on a smiley, but users can answer a question and share their suggestions too. For some quick editing, like fixing typos or adding links, contributors can edit the content easily on the GitHub UI. For heavy editing, adding new content, or for developers who prefer to use Git, we provide the complete Docs as Code workflow. To make contribution easier and to keep content on our documentation site consistent, we created a style guide and templates for all content types. We also developed an editorial workflow that works for both internal and external contributors and ensures that contributors get quick and precise feedback. We thank all of our contributors and display them on our GitHub repositories README page and on our contributors page. We are planning to make the experience of contributors even more rewarding with our upcoming community site. So let's discuss these tools in more detail. The first tool, one that we started developing early on in the process of building our documentation site, is our documentation style guide. We started thinking about this and outlining it right during the discovery phase, because we thought that the information included would help us and other contributors be consistent with the content we produce. For example, as soon as we had an understanding of who our target audience is, we added that information to our style guide. Then, to ensure a consistent communication style throughout our documentation, we started with defining our standards for grammar, syntax, and the different types of technical content we have. By now, we have defined the basics that internal or external contributors need. A detailed description of our target audience, as anyone who contributes will need to understand who they are writing for. For grammar and syntax, we chose a well-known style guide that works for us. It's a US English style guide because our company headquarters are in the US. We added sections on tone and style. Again, these are quite straightforward, like using present tense, second person, active voice. But we find that it's helpful to provide this foundation so that everyone can write consistently. We are not strict at all with contributors. I will talk about this later in more detail. So if they don't follow the style guide, it still helps that editors can review and edit their contributed content to make it consistent with our existing content. We also describe the format we use. Again, this is something that we have to make consistent by the time the content is published. Because of the user experience, we want to ensure keeping our content well structured, but also for improving accessibility, both by helping users understand the flow of the topic and by providing a clear structure for screen readers and other assistive devices. Our documentation consists of different types of topics like tutorials, concepts, and references. To help contribution both for writers and editors, we specify the structure of each content type in ready-to-use templates. Contributors are welcome to edit our style guide, just like they are welcome to edit any documentation topic. We use this style guide to help new contributors, both internal and external, and to help the review and editing process. On the Write the Docs Slack, sometimes there are some questions from other writers about examples of style guides and how to start. So I hope that our style guide could also be helpful for other writers who are planning to write one themselves. Our site uses Liquid Pages, but to make editing easier for contributors, we write documentation content in GitHub flavored Markdown and use a Markdown converter to turn it into Liquid. We went with Markdown because it's a versatile markup that provides semantic meaning for content while still being quite easy to read. Most developers already know it from GitHub. Most writers and editors are familiar with it. And even if someone doesn't know it, they can usually learn the basics fast. or use a Markdown editor, especially when using our templates that are already written in Markdown and include the whole structure. Semantic HTML is important for accessibility, and we make sure not to style text any other way than through Markdown, which is then translated into HTML. This way, screen readers can properly navigate through the content, and it also helps overall consistency when, for example, we want to do a design update. As part of the content-first approach, we planned to develop some initial content that we could work with, but even before that, we decided what types of content we would need and outlined the structure of each content type. We were inspired by topic-based authoring and data in the sense that we decided to have three main content types for our documentation: tutorials that describe how to accomplish a task, concepts that provide background information and context, and references like our API reference. We started with outlining the structure for these content types and creating the templates, but as we developed and used our documentation, we also created templates for other content like release notes or use cases. Our templates are written in Markdown and can be used by copying the templates and editing them in your own editor. Each template includes all non-changeable content and placeholders with explanations for the parts to add. Placeholders provide information on the recommended format, for example, title case, and any requirements or limitations, for example, the maximum number of characters. Now, I will talk a bit about our approach to communication and the channels and tools we use to communicate with our community. Just like our workflow is the same for our team members, community members, and external contributors, our communication channels are also roughly the same. For the situation I described in the beginning, being scattered across different time zones, we found that asynchronous communication is the way to go, or more precisely, asynchronous most of the time and real-time communication if required. Similarly to how we communicate among team members, we use asynchronous and real-time communication tools to communicate with our community. We even stretch real-time communication tools like a video conference to become somewhat asynchronous. For example, town halls are video conferences like webinars that we or partners hold about topics that can be interesting to the community. We record them and community members can comment on them on Slack. One of our main communication channels within our team and with the community is dedicated Slack channels, where everyone can ask questions, share ideas, and get to know our team members and each other. Besides that, as I already showed you, we offer different ways to contribute to our documentation through the feedback block or through GitHub. We also regularly run UX research sessions that community members can join to gather feedback we will use to improve Platform OS and our documentation. For the UX research sessions, we use tools that work well remotely, and we also adjusted our processes and workshops to best fit the remote environment. Community members can find the ongoing user research that they can join and the results of past user research sessions on our documentation site. We also offer several ways for community members to stay in the loop through the weekly status reports, release notes, our roadmap, and our blog. Related to our documentation, status reports include any new content, updates, and plans for our documentation. We link all items in the status report to GitHub tickets so that community members can learn more about them or contribute to them if they would like to. The status reports also include other updates like the latest release note, articles we published, invitations to conferences we speak at, and so on. Our release notes have a structure predefined in a template. They have three main sections: new, improved, and fixed. We found that providing this template helped our developers a lot in providing release notes every week, as they only have to copy the template or the previous release note and fill out the list. In the end of my session, I thought that now that you have some insight into our processes and tools, I'd talk a bit about our experiences with them how they have helped developers and other members in our team and community contribute to our documentation. First of all, we found that having many different channels of communication open to everyone helped, because some people are more comfortable with adding a comment on Slack. For example, when we share our status report, we often get questions or other feedback in the Slack thread where we have shared it. Sometimes people ask questions in Slack about something, then we know that they haven't found the answer in our documentation, so we can update our docs. Others like to open and comment on tickets on GitHub, while still others like to discuss topics on video conferences or like to contribute to user research. I think that keeping all of these different communication channels for the community is important, so we just have to make sure that all of this feedback is collected in a structured way in the background. Another aspect is actually contributing content, writing tutorials, use cases, and so on. And this is where we found that the templates helped a lot. As writers, we all know how intimidating a blank page can be, and it's even worse for people who are not confident in their writing skills or don't enjoy writing. The templates take care of this by providing the structure, providing an outline, and even instructions on what to write, so it feels more like filling in a form than actually writing an article. We found that developers really like this approach, and it makes them more willing to write content. Another aspect that we had to consider as an international team and community was the different language skills and writing skills of our contributors. Here, what helped again were the templates, as they already provide the format, at least so they don't have to think about that. But what helped even more in this regard was encouragement. Making sure that developers understand that what we need from them as subject matter experts is basically the information in any shape or form that they are comfortable to provide. So we are very flexible with this. If you absolutely don't like writing, you can record a quick screencast where you show the tutorial, or you can just describe the process in Slack or in a text file, and someone else will write a tutorial based on what you provided. We always explain that what you contribute is a draft. Someone will proofread it and edit it, so you really don't have to worry about how perfect it is. Once developers feel that they can really just share their thoughts on a topic that they are passionate about, without anyone judging their English or writing skills, they really start contributing lots and lots of topics. I hope that the processes, tools, and experiences I shared with you will help you in your projects. I'm looking forward to answering your questions right after this session. If you'd like to learn more, please check out our templates in our GitHub repository, check out our documentation site, articles on our blog, and if you feel like it, please contribute. We are grateful for all contributions. Thank you.
Hello!
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. So it worked. The last time I was in an online conference, the neighbors started drilling holes in the wall, so this was better.
I've definitely been there. Neighbors do a lot of things when you're trying to get work done. Yeah. That's what I've learned. All right, we have a ton of questions, so I'm going to just dive right in. So something a lot of people were wondering in various forms of asking was, what percentage roughly, or how much of your documentation is contributed by the community, and also how much time does your team spend reviewing and engaging, or reviewing that documentation and engaging with the community?
It's an interesting question, because it made me realize that we never actually measured it, this percentage, but because we consider contribution to be from feedback through code contribution, even when you just fix a typo, to contributing a whole topic, it's hard to draw the line. But we can say from one aspect, all of our documentation is contributed, because we started with user interviews, workshops, so nothing is without the input of users, without their feedback or their requests. On the other hand, most of the documentation is written by us with additions and extensions, and some fixes written by community members,
Mm-hmm.
or some topics like use cases contributed by community members.
Yeah, that's really great. So then when you're managing all of these contributions or different, like, I guess, inputs, how do you avoid creating review bottlenecks? You know, because sometimes it can be hard in the open source community to get in touch with the people who are creating these pull requests, and I don't know.
We take over from them when they submit a pull request. The whole pull request goes through our editorial workflow. So if we need to, we get in touch with them. But if it's something that we can fix or we can edit, then we just do it ourselves so that it's easier and quicker.
Okay, so then does that also apply to, this was another question we had, does that also apply to fits for your style guide? Like, would you do that as part of a review or separately? I'm guessing
Yes.
Separately based on what you said? I'm not sure.
We do it ourselves separately,
Okay.
yes. For now, at least.
Okay, cool. That's great to know. So then another question that popped up, or like theme, I guess, that popped up in the questions was priority. So how do you put priority between like external contributions and in-house contributions when you have these like pull requests to your documentation?
Yes, priorities are decided based on the topic. So if it's a bug that is fixed, that's of course the highest priority. But if there are different topics, then we know from previous user research which topics are the most requested, and then that gets the highest priority.
Great. And then what types of, I'm just throwing these at you because we have limited time. What kinds of checks do you run manually versus what types do you automate, if any?
Yes, we have automated tests. We tried having automated spelling tests, but that didn't work very well. So we do this manually. Our automated tests are for example code and for the format of our topics and pages.
Yeah, I want to dig into that because we had a few questions about this. Why didn't the spelling check work for you?
Because it always gave errors when there weren't any errors. So we decided to do that manually, at least for now. If we can find a better solution, then that might work.
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. So how do you deal with like frequent questions, for example, from the community? Like, do you have a knowledge forum for developers to find like answered questions, or maybe a forum to ask like other types of questions? How do you deal with that?
Now, most of our community is invited into our Slack channels, but we are working on a community site where they will have the forums and the more structured way to communicate with us. So for now, it's mostly Slack and these town hall video conferences and all the info on our documentation site.
Yeah, that's great. And then we're also, I think everyone wants to kind of put it into context. How big is your documentation and how often do you make changes to it? So if you could just give us maybe an overview of that, that'd be great.
Well, our documentation is about 200 topics, more or less.
Well, that's a lot. Okay.
We make changes to it, I think, probably every workday. So it's really a work in progress all the time, and we continuously improve it and adjust it. So big changes like new topics. We have some statistics for last year came 1 or 2 new topics a week because the documentation was new, fairly new then. Now we have about 1 or 2 new topics a month or so.
Ah, cool. Okay, yeah, that's kind of a lot. That's a lot to manage, I think. All right, how many writers do you have to manage all of this? And as this person really eloquently worded, work in this wonderfully customer-focused way?
It's me.
Okay.
I'm a lone writer in the sense that I am the only technical writer, but of course, developers, support people, also our UX researcher, and everyone writes, but I am the writer in the company.
Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with the chat. I can't believe that you are a lone writer. You seem to do so much. I mean, so many different topics. How do you, I don't know, how do you manage your work? How do you prioritize? I mean, that's a huge question, but like, how do you tackle that, I guess?
Well, I think I was very lucky that I joined before there was a documentation present. So I had the opportunity to come up with a workflow that works for all participants, including me.
Great.
So I think that to be able to do what we are doing, the key is our editorial workflow.
Cool. And then if you're, okay, so then if you're a lone writer and you're dealing with all of these different stakeholders and community contributors, and, you know, I'm guessing there are a lot of different communication channels. You mentioned that in your presentation, and like collecting feedback in very structured ways. How do you do that? How do you manage all these different channels? How do you get that feedback? Like, do you have different types of feedback from different sources, etc.?
Yeah, when feedback gets too much, I consult with our user researcher. She's a very big help for me because when feedback comes from many directions, it's hard to see what's a priority or what's important for the community. So this is why we have regular user research sessions that you can also find it on our documentation site, our previous user research sessions and the results and what we did based on them. So those help very much in distilling all this feedback into something structured that I can work with.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And then, oh, this is a good one. How long did it take you to get to this point? If you started and there wasn't a documentation structure, like how long did it take you to build all of this?
Well, now our documentation is 2.5 years old, but
honestly,
but with this approach, with this very agile, very flexible approach, we had something to show in 3 or 4 months. And then we worked on that. That was quite a turbulent time because then we got lots of feedback, even negative ones, because it wasn't even half done. But those feedback sessions helped a lot to adjust it and to see the direction we're going. And what's very interesting and very good, because we didn't have to spend time on something that we later didn't use, is that because we adjusted always our course, there is nothing that we had to throw away.
That makes sense. And then you kind of just touched on it, but I want to dig into it a little deeper. What's next for you, for Platform OS, for your docs? I mean, 2.5 years, really impressive. Yeah, what's happening next?
Yes, now we are looking into accessibility in more depth and more detail. Of course, we paid attention to it from the very beginning. So technically, our site is 100% accessible. But now we are making adjustments to our writing, to everything on the page that we can improve to make our site more accessible. So this is our next big project that will close in a month or so, I hope.
That's amazing. I love accessibility, so I think that sounds great. And then we still had a bunch of questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. Where can people get in touch with you? What are you going to be doing the rest of the afternoon?
Well, you can write me on Slack, on the Write the Docs Slack, or here in the chat. So
cool. So maybe we can hang out in this chat for a little bit, see what questions come up. Sounds good. Thank you so much for such an informative and really thought-provoking session. So appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.